nullius in verba, right? Do you know what it means?
No.
Take nobody's word for it. It's the motto of the British Royal Society from 1662. This is the power of the scientific revolution that Newton fomented. Take nobody's word for it.
Actually, I worry about that message because I actually think it also contributes to pseudoscience. I think RFK would be happy with take nobody's word for it. Don't listen to those wonky experts with all of their, so-called claims. Do your own research. There is a tension between appeals to authority and doing your own research and the scientific method and common sense. It's not a simple thing. We might as well just go straight to the to the point, which is how are you feeling at the moment about science in the public domain in an era of RFK and measles and God only knows.
It's really unbelievable. The Secretary of Health and Human Services is America's most notorious vaccine denier, that every tenet of the way we create knowledge has just been thrown out. It's Orwell. It's Orwellian. The doublespeak, the executive orders, the January executive order. Let's, in the name of freedom of speech, no more fact-checking for any government agencies. There's this great saying, if you mix science with politics, you get politics. And Anthony Fauci got completely demonized. And one of the reasons for demonizing him was to say that he had used his influence as then the head of the NIAID, National Institute of Allergy and Infectious Disease, to determine a major grant. And
was this the Wuhan grant?
So let me backtrack a second, if I may. So his institution was funding research at Wuhan, I think, for the grand sum of something like $100,000 a year. Now, given that after the first SARS outbreak in 2002, the whole world was terrified of another outbreak. They had seen how, deadly a coronavirus could be and how quickly it could spread across the world. So they set up research to monitor what was going on in China, to monitor bat viruses, for instance. And if you're the National Institute of Allergy and Infectious Disease, well, you would want to be part of this sentinel network. And to that aim, they were funding a small amount of money to the Wuhan Institute of Virology, which was doing this monitoring of bat viruses. They were going to the caves, checking to see what's cooking in there, or rather bringing the viruses back to the lab and checking to see what these bat viruses were capable of, because we know the first SARS came from a bat virus in these caves in Yunnan province. How did this all get turned on its head and turn Anthony Fauci into, a demon? You want to hear this story?
Yeah.
Okay. So this is a real Australia-America connection. So Eddie Holmes at the University of Sydney has long-standing collaborations with a researcher in China. Zhang, I think, was his name. And they're doing pretty innocent stuff. They're interested in viruses, both of them. And Eddie's an expert on analysing the family tree of viruses. Zhang is an expert too, and he's going out there and collecting all these weird viruses in China from insects, plants, whatever. And then they analyse them together because that's what nerdy scientists like to do. They like to figure out the family histories of viruses, the most populous living or non-living thing on the planet. And then Eddie's collaborator gets asked to analyse the identity of this new virus that is causing this unexplained pneumonia in Wuhan in late December. And,
of 2019, just to clarify.
2019.
We're talking about the beginning of the pandemic.
Yeah, so in early January, he works all night, 24 hours nonstop, and he finally reads the code of the virus. And he shares it with Eddie, and they start analysing it. And Eddie says, look, you've got to release this to a global database. The whole world has to know what this is so that people can start developing rat tests and, develop vaccines, whatever. Knowledge is power. Francis Bacon. Zhang is reluctant to do it because just this morning he's had an official order from the Chinese government saying you can't release anything without official government permission. And, the wheels of bureaucracy move slowly in China. Eddie Holmes gets on the phone to him and says, Zhang, you have to release this. Zhang says, give me a minute or two to think about it. Calls him back and says, okay, let's release it. And they do. And then the virus code is available for the whole world to start analysing. Poor Zhang, there are consequences for what he's done. His lab gets shut down and he's punished. But he's also acknowledged as, one of the scientists of the year for what he's done.
By China or just by...
No, I think maybe by Time Magazine, maybe one of those.
Outside China.
Yeah. Outside China, yes. Outside
a hero
China.
for everybody who knows what they're talking about, and a sinner for the Chinese Communist Party.
Unfortunately, yes. Yeah. So now all the scientists are looking at the code and they're comparing it to the first SARS virus, which broke out in Guangdong in 2002. And the codes are about 85% similar, but they zero in on the business end of the code, which is the part of the virus that attaches to your lung cells. It's called the receptor binding domain. And they're astonished to see that there are just two little changes on this, the torpedo end of the virus that look like they could explain why this second form of SARS is spreading so much more quickly. And this rumour starts going around the chat sites. Do you think this could have been genetically engineered? So Christian Anderson at the Scripps Institute, he's asked to have a closer look.
What is Scripps?
It's a research institute in La Jolla, San Diego. And he gets in touch with Eddie Holmes because the two of them work together. They're a network. And they both end up freaking each other out, basically, that there are these two little tweaks and that could have been created in a lab because it looks like they just, with pinpoint precision went into the business end, the torpedo end of that virus. Christian Anderson gets in touch with Anthony Fauci, tells him his concerns. Anthony Fauci says, okay, let's have a conference call tomorrow, as fast as we can, and get 12 other experts in on this call. And let's see what everybody thinks. So they have this conference call. And Christian Anderson, on a PowerPoint shows the two little bits that have been tweaked. And the other 12 experts are just not convinced. One of the changes is only a single letter change in the code to the so-called furin cleavage site.
And if people are familiar with online conspiracies and Brett Weinstein and people like that, the furin cleavage site will be very familiar. Yeah. It is a staple of COVID conspiracy thinking. The furin cleavage site, it's what looks like a snip. They think it's evidence of genetic modification? It looks like a...
Well, they thought at the time that it's like, when you have, cardboard cutouts and you have dotted lines.
Yeah.
Or
cut here. A piece of toilet paper being ripped.
For instance.
Yeah.
It just shows you where to cut. And the virus, before it enters a human cell, needs to have this snipped open before it can expose the machinery it uses to melt with your lung cell. And look at this. There's one of these little dotted lines showing the enzyme where to snip and just help the virus along. So it looked like, wow, this could be a reason why this second SARS is spreading so well. And then the other site was this receptor binding domain that also had been tweaked. And, maybe this explains why it's, 100 times better at binding to your lung cells. So, Eddie Holmes and Christian Anderson and a couple of other colleagues who'd been looking at all this, they go into this meeting, they're fairly freaked out. But their 12 colleagues, say, cool your horses. We're not convinced. This furin cleavage site is just one single letter of the code has been changed. It's so much more likely that happened through natural mutation. And even if you were going to genetically engineer it, it's a very weird way to genetically engineer it. If you were going to do this, you would use the standard sort of format for doing it, and it doesn't look like that.
What if you didn't want to get caught?
If you didn't want to get caught, you mean if you were doing it as a bioweapon or something?
Well, isn't that what the conspiracy theorists who think that it was genetically created
So there's all different...
Like if you wouldn't want to leave a smoking gun to make it... You wouldn't want to do it the most obvious way if you were the Chinese Communist Party trying to unleash it for whatever reason.
On your own population.
Well, none of that theory makes sense. I mean, I think the theory that the majority of non-lunatics think of when they think of the lab leak theory is that they were doing research into, gain of function or something like this. They weren't snipping bits in and genetically modifying it, but that they were heedlessly researching it and then accidentally...
That's right.
And then
so I think if we go with the most plausible theory, which is that in the course of doing experiments, which they were doing, test of function rather than gain of function, is this new...
But they were doing gain of function?
It comes under the rubric of gain of function, but it's a very... it's a semantic trap, that word, because gain of function refers to any kind of genetic test you're doing to figure out, well, what is, we found these new code on this virus in the bat cave. What is it capable of? So just by testing its function, that comes under the rubric of gain of function. You still need to get...
amplifying its function? Or like, were they amplifying its capacity to be infectious? Do we know?
I don't believe so. No, I don't think they certainly weren't doing it intentionally.
Okay. But that's a thing that gets done. No?
I think most of what comes under gain of function is you're trying to figure out with this virus, a new virus, let's say the bird flu virus, which part of this virus is responsible for its real deadliness. Because if we know, then we know what to look for. And the way you sometimes test what is the deadly part of that virus is you chop it up into bits and put it on a different virus that we know can't replicate. It's a fairly benign virus. To see, is this the component that allows it to get into lung cells? So there's
Got it. My understanding of what people who are critical of gain of function research depict it as is being, in order to study without waiting for decades the infectious properties of a virus, will enhance its infectiousness so that we can see the way that it propagates in a lab in a short period of time, and that'll give us a better understanding of how to prevent its spread in the future. But the problem is, if you then let it out, it's more infectious than it would have been originally. But I don't know how that works, or if that's true.
Yes. So there was such an experiment trying to figure out what was the business end of bird flu, which is an extremely scary virus, very deadly to birds, but also in the rare occasions where it gets into humans, very deadly to humans. So that's been the big fear for years, that bird flu could mutate and start spreading human to human. And so, was it in 2010? I'm not sure of the date. They were doing experiments, intentionally mutating bird flu to see what it would need to be able to spread from mammal to mammal. And they did those experiments with ferrets. And those were scary experiments because they found it didn't take that much to tweak the bird flu virus to get it to start spreading between ferrets.
Seriously?
Yes.
We have this to look forward to at some point in our future?
No. But this created a huge alarm and a huge level of regulation. It really put gain of function on the map. So since that time, there have been incredibly strict regulations around any kind of research like this, NIH-funded research. But of course, that doesn't cover what rogue players might do. So in a way, I think it terrified people as to what you could do with this so-called gain-of-function research by rogue elements. And that is what people feared had happened with SARS-CoV-2, that this was the result of this sort of gain-of-function research. So absolutely a legitimate concern. We'd seen the precedent with bird flu. This was being done in China. We know the Chinese military has its labs. The Chinese are very secretive. All possible. And this is, I think, it was one of the hypotheses on the table, but I think Christian Anderson and Eddie Holmes were thinking that it wasn't that so much as could more benign experiments have gone awry and created SARS-CoV-2. So yes, this is what this meeting was for, the meeting of 12 scientists with Eddie Holmes and Christian Anderson and Anthony Fauci. What are we looking at here? Anyway, at the end of this meeting, the feeling was, we're not convinced that what you're seeing has the hallmarks of, being made in a lab, but go away, do some more research and write up your findings, because the rumor mills are hot on social media. We need to, see what you come up with. You guys are experts. Well, the very next day, Eddie Holmes gets an email from one of his colleagues at the University of Hong Kong. And it is, his colleague has sent him the code of a coronavirus that had been swabbed from, I've lost the name of these animals. They're like anteaters. They're
a pangolin? No.
Pangolins.
A pangolin?
Yes, pangolins, the most trafficked animal in the world. And these pangolins had been confiscated, and they were sneezing and they were sick. And when they swabbed the viruses from them, they had a coronavirus, and this coronavirus had exactly one of those mutations that they had found in the new SARS-CoV-2 in the receptor binding domain. So that was like a day later. So they take that little tweak off the table and said, no, nature made this. And that just leaves the furin cleavage site. So Christian Anderson was still not convinced. Okay, it didn't look like this could have been made in a lab, because if you were going to make a furin cleavage site, you would use the standard genetic engineering tools to do it. But what if it had been made through, not through genetic engineering, but just through the culturing of the virus in cells? And, you can evolve new things in cells in culture. So it could, in a way, be natural, but through the culture in a lab.
Sped up by human
that's right.
interference.
That's right. And maybe intentionally. trying to select for something that would give the virus an edge in the test tube. Exactly.
Even if it wasn't malicious.
Even if it wasn't malicious.
Part of your research.
Yes.
I think that is how I understand the gain of function claim
yes.
at its strongest.
Yes,
to be.
I think so. I agree with you. So I think that was at the back of Christian Anderson's mind. Well, what if, just culturing the virus in a lab, they were trying to see, can we make it more effective? Maybe it had arisen this way. So Christian Anderson wasn't willing to let go of his theory that it might have been made in a lab. And then he starts doing his literature search, and he discovers an interesting thing. The furin cleavage site seems to be good if you're an animal. So lots of, if you're a virus living in an animal,
okay,
it seems to give you an advantage. So lots of coronaviruses, not closely related to SARS-CoV-2, but, cousins, do evolve furin cleavage sites. The virus that causes the common cold. The common cold? Well, one of the cold viruses will have a furin cleavage site. And he discovers an interesting thing when he looks at the literature. While it's good for a virus living in an animal, it helps it spread. If you are a virus being cultured in cells in a dish, they don't like it. They spit it out. So that led him to believe this is not a likely origin of the furin cleavage site. So,
right, if the virus was being stoked by humans in a petri dish to become more infectious, it would find another way to do it than a furin cleavage site.
Yes.
Because that wouldn't be successful in the lab.
Correct.
Is the claim. Right.
Because that's what the evidence had shown, that when you culture them in a dish, they tend to spit it out. So none of this is 100% definitive, but I'm trying to explain, if we go back, how this conspiracy against Fauci came about. So Eddie Holmes, Christian Anderson, and a few more of their colleagues, they write up a paper, or rather a letter to Nature Medicine. And it's very early days. They get this letter out, I think, as in draft form, by February of 2020. It's published by March. And basically they say it's called the Proximal Origins of COVID-19. And they go through the whole process, which we've just been talking about, how they had originally thought, that it might have been made in a lab based on these two signatures, but then the extra evidence that has come to hand and why they no longer believe this to be the case. They say it's not proof, but, on the balance of probabilities, we think this is more likely to be a natural virus. And this is March of 2020. Proximal Origins becomes one of the most cited publications in all of COVID. And not for the reasons that Christian Anderson or Eddie Holmes would have wanted, because people look at this paper and they say, now we know that they went into this conference call with Anthony Fauci, shit scared that, oh no, it looks like this virus has been tweaked in a lab. Then they come out of that conference and they say, no, the preponderance of evidence is it's come from nature. Eddie Fauci must have twisted their arm.
Anthony Fauci. Yeah.
Why did he do it? Well, because his institute funded Wuhan for the princely sum of $100,000 a year. And why did Christian Anderson go along with it? Because he was beholden to the National Institute of Allergy and Infectious Disease for a grant. I got to this because I said that whereas the conspiracists were claiming at the time, whoa, people like Fauci are interfering with science. What do we have now? Are you worried about the interference with science now? All you conspiracists, where are you now?
I mean, just before we leave the question of COVID, the way of doing science, I think, is salient here because you have a very scientific mind and therefore you really want to be able to falsify every claim. And the people who aren't crazy, who are still suspicious about Wuhan, I feel like, let me give you an analogy. My son just lost his tooth. I mean, he's 8, so he's losing his teeth. And I had a conversation with him the other day about the tooth fairy because I put money under his pillow. And if he was a good, scientist, I don't see any reason why, on the basis of verifiable evidence, he wouldn't believe that the tooth fairy is real. But there's a whole bunch of other things that he brings to the table when he starts thinking about it and asking about it, which are not part of the evidential sphere. They're his intuitions about the way that I look at him when he asks me if the tooth fairy is real. They're his knowledge of the existence of other fairies that aren't the tooth fairy. He's bringing a lot to the table that aren't just scientific facts. And I think the person who believes in that the lab leak theory is plausible is someone who takes into account the paranoia of the Chinese Communist Party, the hyper-secrecy in China, the fact that this thing emerged right in the same city as a lab, as one of the most sophisticated labs in the world that was researching precisely this kind of stuff. The fact that there are all kinds of other explanations for the countervailing arguments, like, oh, well, the people who first got it were all around the market. But that's not really a knockdown argument because that could have just been a super spreader event from something that had leaked from the lab anyway. How does one know at what point a strict evidentiary falsification suffices and at what point you're allowed to also smell a rat?
Nullius in verba, right? That's the scientific credo. Do you know what it means?
No.
Oh, I love this. I only discovered this after the book, but it's the motto of the British Royal Society from 1662. And what it means is take nobody's word for it. Nullius in verba. And if your listeners take one thing away from this podcast, it's this. Science, this is the power of the scientific revolution that Newton fomented, picked up by people like Karl Popper. Take nobody's word for it.
Actually, I worry about that message because I actually think it also contributes to pseudoscience. I think RFK would be happy with take nobody's word for it. Don't listen to those wonky experts with all of their, so-called claims. Do your own research. Go online and watch YouTube videos of influencers talking about ivermectin. This is what's interesting about your book is there is a tension between appeals to authority and doing your own research and the scientific method and common sense. It's not a simple thing to figure out. Take nobody's word for it. There are areas of my life where I just want to take people's word for it.
Okay.
I don't want to have to, I don't have to do my own research on vaccines.
Right. No, okay, I see what you're saying. Hold this thought that the power of the scientific revolution of the 1600s was nullius in verba, that we don't take authority's word for it. We don't take Descartes' word for it because he comes up with these lovely flowery theories. We go with Newton because he's got the maths that he can test and he can prove it. Yeah, Mercury's orbit and the coming of Halley's Comet. Whoa, his maths really works. And from that time on, we're taking nobody's word for it. We want to prove it. So this is the power of the science we're living today, the scientific revolution. And when you do want to take somebody's word for it, during COVID when NCIRS, the National Centre on Immunisation, Research and Safety, when they come up with something that says, the COVID vaccine, the Pfizer vaccine is, over 90% effective and its side effects are, really quite acceptable. 1 in 100,000 young men are likely to get myocarditis, but, we're alert for it. We can pick it up quickly and we can treat it. By contrast, if COVID is prevalent and you're a young man, your chances of getting myocarditis are 20 times higher. So before the NCIRS or health department come up with something that is advice, it has been through a battle, a subterranean battle. So I do trust what they say. I've always got my bullshit detectors out, but I will trust them more than I will trust anything that comes out of America's CDC at the moment. It's not about authority, it's about understanding the process that is underlying.
Right.
And their process...
So you're essentially outsourcing your mistrust of everybody to another institution in whom you place your trust.
Well,
So in a strange way, right? Like you're trusting that the skepticism has been active and vibrant.
I know that I've lived science my whole life. As a working scientist, having my, whatever paper I write torn to pieces through peer review. It's brutal. Science is brutal. So I understand the process. I understand it's never black and white. It's always within degrees of certainty and caveats. And I deeply believe there is no better method, certainly not going to a Maha influencer website. Let's go back to COVID. Absolutely. It could have been created in a lab, or it could have come through the wildlife trade. Now, we know that the first SARS, nobody argues that it came from the wildlife trade because it emerged from a wildlife market in Guangdong through infected civets. It's quite incontrovertible because we got the civets and we got the body, right? And we found that they had an early form of SARS, the form that was prevalent in the earliest cases before it had mutated and gone around the world. So nobody disputes that. Unfortunately, with SARS-CoV-2, the Chinese shut down the market very sensibly on the 1st of January because they knew the first case had come from a vendor at the Huanan seafood market. Out of the first...
And did they also shut down the lab? Or scrub the lab or something? Or
No.
No, okay.
No. So the Chinese shut down the market, and the animals that had been traded there, the wild animals, had been traded illegally, and all those vendors vanished. The wild animals vanished. A few weeks later, a national order was given to shut down all the wildlife farms that were providing the civets and the raccoon dogs and the hedgehogs. They called them wildlife farms, but they were just poaching them from the wild. So the bodies disappeared. And it's a real conundrum that they have not been able to find those animals to test them. But so we couldn't get the animal and we couldn't prove it in the second time around. So what do? We've got all the speculation. And Eddie Holmes and Christian Anderson's paper comes out in March and they say, we think the preponderance of evidence is natural. But by May of 2020, you've got other scientists, very credible scientists, saying, we're not convinced. We really need to give the laboratory origin do some better research on it. And one of the scientists who felt this way very strongly was Michael Warraby. And he's a great fan of Karl Popper. He truly believes that your role as a scientist is to disprove theories. So what does he do? So I think in January 2021, sometime later, WHO had done this trip to Wuhan, and they'd come back with this report that says, look, we really think it's most likely that it came through the wildlife trade, and there's great outcry against the WHO report because they say, look, you weren't even allowed into the labs. How can you rule out the laboratory origin? And one of the ringleaders is this guy, Michael Warraby. He organises this letter to Science magazine that says, we really have to investigate the lab leak origin. And then what does he do? He goes into his basement because he's shut down. It's the middle of COVID.
Where is he, incidentally?
I think he's Arizona.
Okay.
I could be wrong.
Somewhere. That's all right.
Somewhere in the States. And he starts doing... so his starting position is, look, the first 50 cases, they managed to trace. A third of them had some connection to the Wuhan seafood market. But that leaves 2/3 who didn't. Well, they worked all over Wuhan, so that doesn't help anybody. But what if we looked at where they lived? That might provide some evidence. So he goes onto his computer and he manages to find the first 150 cases. He goes into all the records from Chinese hospitals and everything that was available on Chinese media in those first weeks of 2000. And he manages, with great perseverance to find the home addresses of the first 150 cases. Now, the first 150 cases are the most informative. Why? Drop a drop of blue dye into a glass of water. In those first seconds, you can see where that drop is. After 5 minutes, it's just a wash of blue. So that first drop is the most informative. Those first 150 cases, where did they live? These are the most informative. Wuhan is a city about the size of Melbourne, but 12 million people, a very densely packed cities, dozens of shopping malls, dozens of markets, other wildlife markets. What are the addresses of the first 150 cases? I ask you, Josh.
Well, I've read your book, so I know that they're in a ring around the market.
Yes, yeah.
With increasing density towards the market.
Yes.
To which I put that to someone who is more skeptical of the official narrative than me, who said, yes, so it could have been a super spreader event there. I don't think anyone's denying that. It's also apparently more densely, the houses are more densely populated around there, so there would be a natural distribution effect in that part of Wuhan because it's more dense. There could be a detection bias in the sense that...
But where did this super spreader come from? If you want to say this super spreader came from the lab...
Yeah, that would be the claim, right?
Yeah. Why isn't it where this super spreader lived? Why isn't it his family?
Well, he might live near the market.
Okay, but you've got... Okay.
I mean, I'm not saying that it's an argument for it. I just think it's not a knockdown argument that it can't have come from a lab. Like the other point is that there could be a detection bias where the people who are reporting themselves, like maybe there's some other reason why more people around the market were reporting. Maybe there's a good health clinic there or something. I mean, we don't know. Out of all of we don't know who was dying of this thing without going onto an official ledger, an official Chinese government.
So the first 150 cases, as I understand, they'd all been sent to a particular hospital to do the COVID tests, and they hadn't been, sent there on the basis of where they worked or where they lived or anything like that.
I mean, it's certainly the strongest case for the zoonotic
it gets
origin.
It's not 100% proof. I mean, you can concoct some weird situation, but really, where did that super spreader come from? he just happened to be shopping at the market.
But why is that weird? Why wouldn't you? If you were a lab worker who was, why wouldn't you go to a market afterwards?
Sure, you could, but why wouldn't you have spread it amongst your laboratory colleagues?
Well, you might have as well, but we might just not pick up that signal in the noise. I mean, I think that it depends on how far out you want to zoom, where your gut says you're going to land on this, I think.
So I think because you're looking at the first 150 cases.
Yeah, but I think there's some kind of like cognitive or epistemological thing that people are not uncomfortable with when you bring to the situation a purely scientific approach which purely looks at evidence, which of course is perfectly sensible, and when you're dealing with an adversary who has the capacity to erase evidence and manufacture evidence. Because it means that you have to suspend your skeptical or rational thinking or you're some sort of Occam's razor because you have to extinguish the possibility that you're being hoodwinked because you can't deal with anything but evidence. And if the Chinese don't let the second team in, which they didn't, and if they wipe the market clean, which they did, and if they're constantly paranoid about, like, all of that behavior might say that they thought that it was the market, and maybe they did. Maybe they didn't know that it was a lab leak yet. But it's also consistent with the hypothesis that they were trying to cover their tracks. So I sort of, I do understand, you quote disparagingly David Leonhardt of the New York Times in defending the New York Times' publication of a lab leak op-ed in saying, like, Occam's razor is the simplest explanation is the best. Here was a city with a one-of-a-kind lab that dealt in exactly these viruses, and the virus got out there. Like, everything else is kind of window dressing. But why is that logically wrong just because when you analyze all of the paucity of evidence that we have, there's no smoking gun?
It's great for conjecture, but there's just no evidence for it. You can just answer to everything. Well, the Chinese have covered it up. The Chinese, that in fact, you could say the Wuhan Institute of Virology, they were all sick, they all had COVID, but the Chinese just covered it up. You can say it. I mean,
it doesn't sound crazy to me.
I can't answer it back. But, these Wuhan Institutes of Virology, and there are several, they're all in, different regions of Wuhan. We're not getting the first 150 cases, emerging from there. And there's more evidence, so it's not just one line of evidence. To me, that the clustering around the market is incredibly powerful. And, if you've read the book, the father of epidemiology, John Snow, traced the source of cholera in Victorian London to a single pump that way, because
a water pump by using this same methodology.
Yes,
looking at where the cases
were all clustered. Yeah, and you find the origin. So it's textbook epidemiology, and just the fact that Michael Warraby went into this wanting to disprove the market origin theory. His goal was to get the best evidence he could, to get the best evidence, the unvarnished evidence from China, the first hospital records, everything he could find. I don't know how he did it, but he managed to get the addresses of the first 150 cases.
Well, yeah, the I don't know how he did it bit is what people will latch onto, because the data, I mean, I, just with a normal sort of skeptical journalist's eye, have a question mark over my head about
he's published
the quality of data
that
he's relying on.
He's published it in Science, so, I could go and ask him.
Yeah.
I interviewed him, and he told me at the time he just, used Google Translate to get onto all the Chinese media.
But even if there are things that he couldn't anticipate, why weren't other people at the lab infected? Like, it is possible they just went home and died, and that there are different patterns of, I'm not saying... It just doesn't feel like a slam dunk to me. There might be differing healthcare. They might just be differing quality of healthcare. They might not get picked up. There must have been heaps of people who had it who didn't know what they had, right? There must have been loads of people who were just dying of a mysterious chest infection and who never sought medical care, or if they did, it was just the guy down the street who happens to be a doctor.
They were getting pretty good at just sort of, doing these X-rays, ground glass opacity.
Yeah, but seriously, I mean, I've been to China a number of times.
No, you're absolutely
my instinct
right.
is that if a poor person starts coughing and feeling sick, they're going to go down the street to the guy with the herbal, with the tea.
That's true.
Herbal tea.
And most of the cases were asymptomatic. We know that. That's why it's so deadly.
Yeah.
You have sleepers, people going around infecting people with no, which is why, 2/3 of those first cases, they couldn't track down to anywhere. They couldn't track them down to anywhere because presumably they were being spread by people
and they were
had
fine.
no symptoms.
Yeah.
And that was why Michael Warraby wanted to look at the addresses of where the people lived. Would he find something that zeroed him to a lab or something else, anything other than the market? So the only pointer we have is to the market, and that comes from the first people to be infected. 1/3 of them, of the first 50 cases, either worked at the market, had a parent at the market, had a relative, and then,
there were still a lot of people who got it who were nowhere near the market.
Yes, but that's later on, when the thing has sort of spread and the information isn't as rich anymore. Sure, then it's just spread.
Right.
So, but there's more information. So the other thing is that early on in the pandemic, there were 2 strains of the virus, and one of them took over and just became fully dominant. Both those strains were present at the market. So that is another piece of evidence. If you want to say it was a super spreader who came from the lab and did his shopping at the market that day and spread it to everybody else, but nobody else where he lived in his neighborhood or in his lab or anything like that, we know that at the beginning people either had one strain or the other. So
why would there be 2 zoonotic strains contemporaneously?
Well, it fits more with the zoonotic hypothesis because you couldn't imagine a better way to evolve a virus than in the wildlife trade.
Well, I could imagine a lab.
They pack these these wild animals on trucks, your hedgehogs, your civets, your raccoon dogs, your snakes, whatever, cheek by jowl in their cages on these trucks, a day or 2 traveling. They're sneezing, the virus gets to sample every kind of
every possible
respiratory ecosystem. Yeah. Whoa, this is good, and what a great way to evolve a virus that is adapted to multiple species, which, by the way, is exactly what COVID-19 was, dogs and cats and
but hang on,
tigers.
but I'm still unclear about how you would get 2 because my thinking about COVID was like, well, if you shuffle a deck of cards enough times, then after you shuffle it 100 million times, you're going to get all jokers, or you're going to get shuffle it all straight, and that's what you've got with COVID. You've got this.
Well, no,
one in a bazillion.
Well,
it's all constantly mutating, and we just sometimes land on this unfortunate outcome where there's something that is deadly and infectious in humans. How does that happen twice at the same time in the same place?
Well, let's imagine we do have a sick raccoon dog, and it's billion viruses each time replicating in it. It sneezes, and each time it sneezes, it's a different deck of cards. Whoa, this one hits Josh Sepp. Oh, I think I like Josh Sepp. One of them takes hold in Josh Sepp. And another raccoon dog has a different infection, also has a billion different types of viruses, hopeful viruses, and spits out another different combination. So, most of them probably won't like Josh Sepp, but maybe.
And that hasn't happened since 2002, but it happens twice in the same week.
I don't know if it happened in the same week. Could have been going on for a long time. This has been going on for years in the market.
Well, but COVID hadn't been going on for years.
No, but it's, slowly evolving. And, I see what you're saying.
Like, what I'm saying is there are two strains of a deadly infectious human disease that have not emerged since 2002, and they both hit the same market at the same time. That, to me, suggests that would go in favor of the lab leak hypothesis more than the market. How would that be in favor of the market hypothesis?
I guess I'm sort of straining at my, knowledge here, but it doesn't seem implausible to me. If you're a raccoon dog and you're already, you've got a form of the virus that's adapted to you, it's come from a bat, it's gone through various different animals. Now I'm the raccoon dog. Every time the virus replicates, it mutates.
Right, so it's already done the legwork of
it's already done the
legwork in the raccoon dog.
Every time it sneezes, each droplet of virus
I see. Yeah,
will have
a different iteration of the virus.
Yeah,
I see. Okay. And you say raccoon dog because one point that you make in the book, which I hadn't realized, is that we no longer think it was from a pangolin. Is that right?
No, we never thought it was from a pangolin.
I did.
Oh, sorry.
I mean, in 2020, everyone was talking about, I'd never heard of what the fuck a pangolin was before, and everyone was suddenly talking about pangolin.
Yes, yeah. Because the virus itself from the pangolin, most of it was pretty different from SARS-CoV-2, but it was just that mutation in the receptor binding domain that was the same as the one
right.
with SARS-CoV-2.
And so do we know what animal it most likely came from?
Well, we have not got an animal.
A species, sorry.
Yeah, we don't have a species from the market that we can take that raccoon dog and take a biopsy from it. Here's what we do have, though. They have a map of the market and where all the different animals were that were being sold. You had the domestic animals, but then you had areas in the northwestern corner that had the wild animals, most of them being traded illegally. And we know that because Eddie Holmes had been there several years before and he'd taken photographs and seen those animals. Anyway, this information came from the Chinese CDC. They withheld it for a year or more, maybe 2 years, until it finally appeared on a database. Florence DeBar was looking through this database and accidentally found it. And what she found was that the swabs in that northwest corner of the market, where they had the raccoon dogs and the civets, that was where they had the highest levels of SARS-CoV-2, and they also had DNA from the animals. Now, circumstantial evidence, if you had a swab, you swabbed the cages where the animals were. Wow, in this single swab that I've picked up with this little bit of cotton wool, I've got both SARS-CoV-2 and I've got raccoon dog DNA. That's highly suspect that the raccoon dog was infected with SARS-CoV-2, but it's not proof.
Got it. So it's probably a raccoon dog or
we know that...
Or one of the things that was in a hut next to the raccoon dog.
Yes, yeah. We know that a raccoon dog was there. We've got its DNA. We know that SARS-CoV-2 was there.
Like a detective mystery, isn't it?
But do we know that SARS-CoV-2 was inside
in the kitchen
infecting the raccoon dog? I mean, we know SARS-CoV-2 travels in the air. It could have come from another animal. It could have come from a human who sneezed it out. So it's not proof.
Yeah. I want to let you go, but I want to wrap by talking about the purpose of the book and science more broadly. I find myself in pessimistic moments at the moment about the future of reasonableness, rationality, and science. What do you hope the book achieves for your grandson?
Yeah. Well, I first discovered you when you were talking with Jonathan Rauch.
Great man.
Great man. And, he seems optimistic that the pendulum will swing back. I hope that the Trump administration fails fast, that people will see that when you ignore science, there are consequences. When you take away the ease of being vaccinated, when you suggest that in Florida children do not need to get vaccinated when we go to school, when you start spreading a lack of confidence in vaccines, you see the consequences. I mean, the absurdness of it. I mean, it's absurdism, isn't it? The recommendations of RFK Jr. now, I think he put out a report just last week. It's very hard to keep up. But things like, let's, increase nutrition for children. Who could argue with that? Yeah, but Trump's funding cuts have taken away
also
programs
nutrition and vaccines, not nutrition or vaccines. Like, why is it an either or? Like, what? Just the primacy of it seems strange to be like, you don't need vaccines because we all need to eat better. Can't we all need to eat better and also need vaccines? Like, I don't get it.
And, the internal inconsistencies. So, fluoride is associated with, all the ailments of the 21st century, really? But fluoride is also responsible for the fact that we're not all wearing dentures at this age. So both those things seem to be in his report. So I hope... Look, I lived in America for 6 years and I believed Americans were very smart. And I hope they wake up.
All right. Me too, Elizabeth. Me too. Thank you for your time. It's lovely to talk to you.
Thank you, John.